There we go. We are recording. Okay, good. Hi all, my name is Ahmed Jassat. I'm from the South African Oracle User Group. I'm a volunteer there, and our primary focus is to educate and uplift the Oracle community in South Africa, and we are growing into Africa as well. Today we are very fortunate. We have a training session. We have moved away from the sales talk and the PowerPoint presentations. We now, our main goal is to train our community and uplift our community with the Oracle technologies. So today we're going to be, this is one of 4 sessions. We'll try to have the next 3 sessions every 2 weeks. And we're going to be discussing a technology called Oracle Private Cloud Appliance. It's an excellent product, and the agenda for today is, as you can see on the screen, is we'll do a PCA product introduction overview. Then we'll go to the PCA dashboard, the PCA CLI usage, that means command line interface usage, and then we'll have an introduction to the Oracle Virtual Manager. Before we proceed, just some formalities. Once the COVID has cleared, we have planned a session in Cape Town, a 2-day a 2-day conference on the 9th and 10th of November. But that's pending according to what's happening around us. A little bit about myself. My name is Ahmed Jassat. I work for Edge Evolve. I'm an apps DBA. I'm extremely passionate about the Oracle brand. I love what I do, and I found my strength in Oracle. I'm also a volunteer at the South African Oracle User Group, and my main aim is to use my skill to make Oracle a successful product at customers. Can I please ask everyone who joins to be on mute? Our speaker and our presenter today is Ian Dixon. Ian is from the EMEA Oracle Solution Center in Scotland. Amongst other duties, he manages the private cloud appliances in the Oracle Data Center. Ian, can you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, good morning. As Ahmed was saying, I administer and manage several private cloud appliances in our data center in Scotland, and I've been doing that for a few years now, pretty much since the PCA first came around. So I'm pretty familiar with using the PCA. Only recently I've started doing some presentations and some customer demos, etc., to kind of sell the PCA and talk about its benefits, etc., etc. So I use the PCA myself from day to day, i.e., providing virtual machines for people, for workshops, for demos, for proof of concepts, etc., etc. So, as well as being as well as managing PCAs, I'm also a PCA user on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Ian. So Ian has allowed us his time to train us on the Oracle Private Appliance. Like I said before, this is one of 4 sessions, so we will schedule the next during the course of the next couple of months. Then with Ian is Yakub Patel. Yakub has been in the industry for extremely long time, experienced in all the Oracle hardware. Yakub, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Ahmed. My name is Yakub Patel. I'm responsible for pre-sales consulting for South Africa and Botswana. My primary responsibility is consulting on engineered systems, that's Exadata, ZDLRA, Zero Data Loss Recovery Appliance. We did a session like this last month with Ahmed as well, and the PCA as well, and standalone servers and storage. So if you have any opportunities you would like us to help you with, please contact myself and Ahmed, and we'll help you to drive your opportunities to close. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you. I think we now a very healthy group of 40 people on the session. Ian, over through to you. And people, if you got any questions, please put it into the chat box. Yakub will try to reply it. If he doesn't, if he needs Ian's help, at the end we have 10 minutes of Ian's time. Ian, thank you very much. You can continue now. You can share your desktop.
Okay. Okay, so I should be sharing my screen now. Hopefully
Yeah, we
you
can see
that.
your screen. You can proceed. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So I'll just very quickly give an overview of the PCA as a product, describe what it is, what's inside the rack, and what it's used for. We won't spend too much time on this because it's a little bit marketing centric, but now Ahmed, if you could mute everyone's lines while I'm doing this, just because there's quite a lot of people.
Okay, no, will do.
Yeah, if you can do that. Okay, so the private cloud appliance has been around, as I mentioned, for a number of years now. It's a pretty mature product, a stable product, and one that is certainly on Oracle's roadmap for several years going forward. So it's very much a core part of Oracle's offering, along with the other engineered systems. When you purchase the PCA, you can get it with a minimum of 2 compute nodes, or a full rack has 25 compute nodes. And it's a single engineered system, and it supports all manner of x86 virtual machines or operating systems, i.e. Linux, Windows, or x86 Solaris. As it mentions at the bottom, it says 6 hours from installation to production. Now that will depend very much on how many compute nodes are in your rack. So we just got a PCA in our data center a couple of weeks ago, and it only had 2 nodes. So I was able to get it set up in about half an hour, maybe an hour at the most. And if you did get your rack with fully populated rack with 25 compute nodes, it would take possibly the 6 hours that was mentioned there. It's a lot. The new version of PCA with the X8 servers inside is a lot faster than the old version, and one reason for that is because the old version you had to attach external storage to make the most of the rack, but with the way they've designed the rack now, there's more space internally for a storage shelf, which wasn't possible before. So it now has internal storage inside the rack. Everything is self-contained, so they've been able to with integrating that storage, they've made the storage a lot faster as well and provided a lot more internal storage. So everything is now self-contained, much easier to manage, much easier to install. Just a little bit chat about the hardware. So it's X8, Oracle X8 servers are the management nodes and the compute nodes. Down at the bottom of the rack, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail in a second, is 2 Oracle ZS7-2 storage controllers in an active standby configuration for high availability. And there's a single DE324C, which is what they call a high capacity disk shelf in the middle of the rack. And again, we'll look at the makeup of the rack in a little bit more detail in a second. As it mentions there, there's 100 gigabit Ethernet internal fabric. So everything inside the rack can communicate at 100 gigabits. And you can connect the rack to your data center network at any of the speeds mentioned here, 10, 25, 40, or 100, depending on what you have at the other end of the wire in your data center. So this is how the rack is made up. And again, once we get onto our own rack, we'll look at this in a bit more detail. So very quickly, you've got your storage controllers at the bottom. Then you have your 2 management nodes. As I mentioned, they're X8 servers, X8-2 servers. You have some compute nodes, as you have at the top, and in the middle you have your networking and your storage. So as I said, 1 single storage shelf in the middle of the rack, and you have 5 switches. So you have 2 leaf switches, 2 spine switches, and the management switch. And it's the spine switches that you'll be connecting to your data center network. The management switch is just for the management of all the different components. That's internal. And the leaf switches is what the network of the compute nodes connect into. But that's details we don't need to worry about just now. Main thing to be aware of is that storage controllers at the bottom, then the 2 management nodes, and then compute nodes are above those. And we'll go into more detail in a second. Now, there's 3 ways you can manage a PCA rack, 3 basic ways anyway. So you have the PCA software itself. So this is what you will use to do management tasks on the PCA, i.e. Reprovisioning any compute nodes, setting up a new network perhaps, changing compute nodes between tenant groups or server pools. Again, we'll look at that in a second. That kind of thing. Very high level, excuse me, management tasks. Then you have the OVM manager, which we will touch on later and which we'll go into more detail on in a future session. This is the basic GUI management tool for the PCA, and it's, again, OVM Manager has been around for many years. Stable product, very easy to use, pretty intuitive, pretty self-explanatory. It hasn't got maybe all the fancy bells and whistles that VMware, something like that has, but it is very easy to use and very stable and very intuitive, like I say. And then you have the possibility to use Enterprise Manager on top of this. So Enterprise Manager would sit above, you would set up a server with Oracle Enterprise Manager on it, and you would register the PCA with that Enterprise Manager server. And then you can do a lot more, you can do a lot more in terms of permissions, and you can separate out people's permissions and what they can and cannot do in a lot more detail than you can with OVM Manager. One of the downsides of OVM Manager is there's only one login, so there's only one administrator login, and once you have that, you can do pretty much anything. With Enterprise Manager on top of that, you can give people very granular permissions, so you can really nail down what a user can and cannot do. You can basically make sure that they can only work on their own virtual machines and their own pool, and they can't touch anybody else's. Whereas with OVM Manager, that's not possible. And again, we'll look at this in more detail either today or in a future session. Upgrading the rack is, again, another good feature. Pretty easy job. I just upgraded one of our racks last week, and it can take a few hours, but again, as with installation, it depends how many nodes you have inside your rack. So the Oracle have provided a tool now, which basically, once you've downloaded the upgraded software, which would be a TAR bundle, maybe a couple of gigabytes, put that on your rack. There's a tool which you run, which basically does it all for you. As it says here somewhere, anyway, it's a rolling up, what they call a rolling upgrade. So basically you upgrade each of the management nodes in turn, and then you upgrade each of the compute nodes. So you shouldn't have to bring any of your virtual machines down if you don't want to. All you would do is you would migrate those virtual machines onto another node while you upgrade the node that they're on. So again, it can take a few hours depending on how many compute nodes you have in your rack. A little bit of detail about the Oracle X8 servers that are inside the rack. So you can order these with 3 memory configurations, and the PCA that we're going to use today, or I'm going to show you today, has the medium-sized memory configuration, 768 gigabytes. Obviously, they have a couple of internal storage hard drives for the operating system. The management nodes, again, X8 too, they have the smaller memory configuration. Storage-wise, as I said, there's one single high-capacity storage shelf in the rack. When we look at the rack, again, you'll also notice there's a couple of rack units which are left empty, and that is, you can install a second storage shelf there if you so desire, if the storage that comes by default isn't enough for you. And by default, once the RAID and the formatting, etc., is taken into consideration, the user will have roughly 100 terabytes of usable storage for their virtual machine. So in most circumstances, that'll be enough, but in some circumstances, they may want to add this second optional storage shelf. And I won't talk about this in any detail, but there is the option with Enterprise Manager, you have the option of setting up Oracle's SiteGuard, which is a disaster recovery solution. So if you have a couple of PCAs, you can set up one PCA as your standby system, and with SiteGuard, everything can be configured so that if there's a failure on the primary system, then the secondary system will take over in exactly the same manner as the primary system. But again, we're not going to touch on this in any detail today, possibly in a future session. So that's all the slides I have. let's move to looking at the PCA itself. So when you first, actually, just before I do this, I'll just show you a couple of pictures. So this is the PCA we're going to be using in a second. This is downstairs in my data center in Scotland. As you can see, it's roughly half full of nodes, so we've got plenty of room for expansion up at the top, but we've got maybe 6 or 8 compute nodes in the system already. And I'll just quickly show you another image. So this is the inside, the rear of the PCA, showing the internal switches. So as you can see, everything's pre-cabled, everything's kind of fairly neatly cabled. And these are the 2 spine switches, and these are the ones that you connect into your data center network. So there's 2 ports, port 5 on each switch, which you need to connect to your data center network. That's all you need to connect to get the PCA up and running. And once you've done that, you would then connect your laptop into a port on this management switch. And with the PCA, there's some documentation that tells you what IP address to set your laptop to. Once you've done that and you've powered up the rack, on your laptop you will be presented with the dashboard. So where are we? Sorry, this is what they call the PCA dashboard. So this GUI, this web page will appear on your laptop when you first power up the PCA, and you log in with a default username and password, which is again provided for you in the documentation. And the first thing you need to do is put in one or two just very basic network details. So you need to provide a public IP address for each of the 2 management nodes, as I've done here, and you need to provide a virtual IP address, a VIP, which is the one that this is the IP address which you will use to access the rack once it's running. So this IP address is basically held by whichever management node is active at any one time. So the management nodes are in again active standby configuration for high availability. So if one fails, the other one will take over the management of the PCA. And whichever one is active will have this IP address associated with it. All you need to do, so you just put these in, put in a few more details like basic stuff like DNS servers and some, your NetMask and your gateway, the usual stuff. You do apply changes, and at that point, the PCA management software will start to install the rack. And at that point, we can move to the hardware view. The hardware view basically gives you a picture, a kind of picture of what the, let me just get this out of the way. How do I get rid of this? It doesn't matter. Anyway, so it's a picture of what the rack looks like physically, basically. So as we saw a second ago in the slides, we've got the 2 storage controllers, at the bottom. Then we've got our 2 management nodes, and then we've got our compute nodes. So if I was to click on any of these components, i.e. this one here, you'd see that it is successfully provisioned 100%, and hence this green check mark. So when you start the installation process, the 2 management nodes are pre-installed, so they'll have this green check mark, but none of the compute nodes are installed. So basically the installation process is that the management software on the management nodes will install the operating system on each compute node in turn. So as the installation goes along, you will see a green check mark appear next to each compute node in turn. And as I said, depending on how many compute nodes you have, this could take a few hours. If you only have a couple, it might take half an hour to an hour. And that's literally all you have to do to get the rack up and running. It's extremely quick and easy engineered system to get up and running for use. Yeah, excuse me, sorry. You will also use this dashboard. You'll only really use this dashboard infrequently, but you will use it again if you come along at a later date and decide to add some extra compute nodes. So we started off with 2 in this system, and we've added 6 or 7 since then. So adding additional compute nodes is extremely easy, because everything is pre-cabled inside the rack, so the process of installing an additional compute node is very, very simple. You basically just remove the filler panel, slide in the node, connect the power cables and the couple of network cables, and press the power button on the front of it, and that's it. The management software will detect that a new node has been added, and it will basically start the installation for you. Because every cable is pre-labeled, there's no chance of any confusion there, and the management software knows which slot you've put the compute node into because of the cables, because all the cables are pre-labeled and pre-configured. So it will start the installation. Now, just to quickly mention the naming of the components inside here. So if you see there, I hope it's not too small, you can see that the name of this component is OVCA CN07R1. That name basically means that this is a compute node, hence the CN part. It's in rack unit 7, hence this 07 part. OVCA is the old name for PCA, so they've not got around to changing the names from OVCA to PCA for the components, probably for backward compatibility. So it's OVCA compute node in rack unit 07, and R1 just means rack 1. So if you had 2 or 3 PCAs chained together, which is a possibility, the nodes in the second PCA would be called R2, and the third PCA R3, etc., etc. So we only have a single one here, so everything in this rack has R1 at the end. You can see the IP address there. That is an internal IP address, so none of the compute nodes have external IP addresses. So to access the compute nodes or to access any of the components really inside the rack, you must do that through the management nodes first. So nothing has a external presentation apart from the management nodes. So that's the dashboard. As I said, you'll use this for the first installation of your rack and for adding compute nodes. But once you have once you've gone through the installation, which can, as I said, can take a few hours, but is extremely low maintenance, if you like. There's very little interaction for the administrator to do. Your rack is basically up and running and ready for you to use. Once you do that, you will stop using the dashboard and you will use what we call OVM Manager. I'll just quickly show you the OVM Manager. We're not going to go into the management of VMs in today's session. That's a subject for a future session, but I'll show you the OVM Manager login. So as you can see, we're using the URL, using the IP address of the virtual, what we call the virtual IP address, which we entered into I'll just quickly show you, into the network parameters earlier. So this is the management virtual IP address, 138.3.8.184, and that's what we're using to access the rack for OVM Manager. So again, as I mentioned, we only have a single administrator login, so this is something you need to be very careful with if you're managing a PCA, because obviously anyone who has these admin credentials can do pretty much anything. So you have to be very careful with who you give these credentials to. And that gets us into our OVM Manager GUI management tool. Before we get into this, the agenda suggests talking about the PCA software itself. So let's have a look at that. So I've used SSH to connect with one of the management nodes on my PCA. So as you can see, I'm on management node 06 here. So that's the second management node. And if I run that command that I've just obviously run, it tells me that I'm on the master management node. So management node 05 will be sitting in the background on standby. And if I was to reboot this, if I just typed in reboot here to reboot this management node, then the other management node would take over management of the rack. So it's an active standby. Pretty much everything in the PCA rack is configured for high availability so that if one component fails, the other can take over, and there's no downtime involved. So we're on the master management node, and as I mentioned, the PCA admin software, we won't use this very much. It's for high level administrative tasks on the PCA rack. So I'll show you a couple of commands. So you can either do this interactively using this PCA admin command, or there's also a PCA admin shell, which I'll show you in a second. So if I do PCA admin show version, for instance, that shows us the software version that's running on the PCA. So we're on PCA software 242, which is the current version. That's been out for a number of months now. So I think I just upgraded this rack recently, actually, from 241 to 242. And the new rack that we got came with 242. I think 243 is in the pipeline. They generally do a software update about every 6 months. And as I said, it's pretty easy to install. They have this PCA updater tool now, which you can download from Oracle's support website, which does pretty much everything for you. So you just upgrade the management nodes, as I said, and then once you've done that, you upgrade each compute node in turn. So it's a pretty basic, steady rolling upgrade. And as I said, you shouldn't have to stop any of your VMs if you don't want to. You can just migrate them. You can just use the live migration feature, which we'll look at in a future session, to migrate the VMs between compute nodes as you upgrade them. So we've got PCA software 242 on this rack. Other things that you would use the PCA admin software to do would be to manage your server pools. So when you first install the rack, every compute node or server is part of the same pool. So they all share a single Oracle clustered file system. You may want to split the nodes into different server pools. For instance, you might have a development and test environment that you want to separate out. So you might want to separate the nodes into those. Or if I show you one of our other PCAs, this is one of our older ones, an X5 PCA. If I log into this one, you can see that in this particular PCA, this particular rack, we've got a mixture of compute node types. So if I just expand the server pools out, we've got 3 server pools. We've split our nodes into 3. This is the default server pool. So this is the one, when you first install a rack, every node will be in this pool. They've called it rack 1 server pool. You don't want to delete this pool, and you don't want to rename it, but you can, if you like, move all the nodes out of it, as long as it's still there and it still has the same name. The software expects it to be there, and it can cause problems if it's not. So once this is finished refreshing, I'll just pull this over, and you can see the default server pool, excuse me, come on, has got X5 servers in it. I don't know why it keeps refreshing like that. It's annoying. Anyway, you can see the X5 servers there, and in the second server pool, we've got X6 servers. Once this refreshes. Sorry, my dog is barking. Sorry, it's taking a while to refresh here. Oi. Okay, you can see there that the second server pool has got X6 servers in it. So we've split these into separate pools because there's issues with migrating VMs between nodes with different CPU types. So the X6 servers will have different CPU types to the X5. So it wouldn't be possible to live migrate a VM from an X6 to an X5. So for that reason, we've split them into 2 separate server pools. In our X8 PCA, we only have X8 nodes. I'll just show you that. again.
Sorry, Ian, you're speaking on mute.
Yeah, yeah. No, my dog was barking. I was trying to calm him down. There's somebody outside. That's what he's barking at them.
No,
So,
don't worry.
yeah,
We totally
yeah,
used to animals, and it's fine. Don't
yeah.
worry.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see there we've got X8 servers here, and we've created a second. One of my colleagues created a second server pool called Tenant Group 2, and he's put a couple of servers into that. But again, they're X8 servers. I believe that the Oracle X9 server is in the pipeline, is coming maybe possibly later this year or at the start of next year. So again, when these X9 servers are available, you will be able to install X9 servers into this rack without any problems. But you probably want to create a separate server pool for them when you do, if you do that, because of the compatibility issues with live migration that I mentioned. Now you'll see that this server pool is called Tenant Group 2. Now in all the documentation, they use both terms to describe a server pool, i.e. a server pool and a tenant group. I'm not sure why they decided they needed two names for these, but basically a server pool and a tenant group are exactly the same thing, and the two terms are interchangeable. So we've got two here on our rack, and you will use the PCA admin software to manage your server pools. So if I go into the PCA admin shell, like so, you'll see I'm now at the PCA admin prompt. So any commands I type in now are PCA admin commands. So if I do, for instance, this compute node, that lists all my compute nodes. And you can see clearly here what I was talking about earlier, the naming convention. Compute nodes are named according to which rack unit they are situated in. So, and these IP addresses, again, as I mentioned, these are the internal IP addresses that the management node will use to communicate with the compute node. Again, to reiterate, the compute nodes don't have public IP addresses, so you can't directly log into a compute node from your data center network. You have to do it through one of the management servers. And as you can see, provisioning state, they're all saying running. So if I'd added an additional node and I had started, I'd powered it on and the management software was installing the OS on it, it would say initializing or provisioning or something here instead of running. But once it was finished, it would say running. So if I look at more detail, in fact, I could do something like to look at my management nodes, or if I wanted to see more detail of a particular compute node, I would do pick one at random. So it's telling me that it's part of this particular tenant group or server pool, so the default one. It's running and it's got these networks presented to it. And when we go into the OVM manager in a second, we'll look at the networks and how they are defined and configured. And as I said, if I wanted to manage my server pools or tenant groups, this is what I would use to do it. So there's a command I would type in to move. If I wanted to move this node from rack 1 server pool to the other one, to the tenant group 2, I would type in move 09 from this one to the other one, and it would do that. I don't want to do that. Normally, just with OVM Manager, you could just drag nodes from one server pool into another, but with the PCA, we need to use the PCA command line because the PCA database, PCA's kind of internal management database, would not be kept up to date with the move if we just did it through OVM Manager. So again, this is explained in the documentation. You have to use the command line to manipulate your server pools. Don't just use the OVM Manager because that can cause problems. So yeah, let's leave the PCA command line there. Again, as I said, you'll use it pretty infrequently. I hardly ever use it. It's just for very high level management tasks that you would use it. That's better. And just while we're logged into the PCA management node, I haven't done this yet on my new system, but on my older system, I've installed, and this is recommended, a product called, or a little bit of software. It's just basically one RPM, called ASR, Automatic Service Request Generator. So what ASR does is basically, once you've installed it and registered all your components, which is just a single command for each component, if there's any hardware issues, if there's any faults, basically with any of the components, it will automatically generate a service request with Oracle support for that component to be replaced. So as you can see here, all the compute nodes and the internal switches, and also you can do the ZFS as well, are registered. So if any of these components, say for instance, has a faulty DIMM or anything like that, it will automatically create a service request with Oracle support, and the replacement part will get sent out, usually before you've even noticed there's a problem. So it's recommended to install that. As I said, it's just a single RPM, and it's documented in the PCA documentation. It's very easy to set up. So why wouldn't you use it? It just saves a lot of manual management of it means that problems are sorted before you can realize that they've actually occurred usually. So that's ASR. So let's go back to the OVM manager. So as I touched on in the slides, the three ways of managing the PCA, this is by far the one that I use most frequently. And this is the GUI tool to manage our virtual infrastructure, our virtual machines, and all our storage and all our networking. So as you can see, we've got these several tabs along the top. We'll just look at each of these very briefly. Jobs tab just shows you any management tasks, any VM tasks that have run from any user, so anyone who's logged in. So nothing much has happened today yet, but if I go to yesterday, you can see a bunch of things happened yesterday. If I expand that to all, obviously my colleague's been working here creating some WebLogic VMs, etc. So these are all the jobs that ran yesterday. Reports and resources, I don't use this tab very much. One feature I do use is these tags. So a tag is like just a little note you can put on a VM. So we've created some tags here for various projects and various users. So we can add these tags to a VM just to say who owns it, what project it's part of, that kind of thing. So if somebody logs on, it makes it easier for them to see who owns a VM or what it does. Probably the first tab you'll use when you set up the rack is the storage tab. So again, by default, the management software, when the rack's installed, will create a default LUN. So this again on the old PCAs before they had the internal storage. This was a lot more complicated and a lot harder to understand and to manage. But now everything's internal. It's actually pretty easy and pretty simple. So we have this single entry under SAN servers with this rather unintuitive name. But inside it, if I click on here, we can see our LUNs basically. So when the rack, like I said, when the rack's first installed, they give you one single default LUN. So that basically, if you're in a rush to get started, you have some VMs that you want to create. You don't have to do any management tasks when you first install the rack. You can just get on and create your VMs. So they've given you a single LUN, which is this one here, this 3 terabyte LUN by default. So as we saw in the slides earlier, there's about 100 terabytes of usable space. So they just give you one small LUN of 3 terabytes just to get you started if you are in a rush to get started. So this is the default one here, and as you can see, we've created a few more small LUNs on our 100 terabytes of usable space. So you do that using the Oracle ZS GUI, and I should have that running actually. So somewhere. I can just quickly show you. Actually, no, it'll take too long to dial up. It's basically the same way that you manage a ZFS in any other situation. You just create a LUN using the ZFS GUI or command line, and once you've done that, you go to your PCA, you go to your OVM manager, and you would right-click on the you right-click here and do a refresh. And once the refresh is run, it will pick up the new LUN and it will appear here. It will give it one of these default names, sun brackets number, and then you can name it to what you want to call it, as we have done here. So this is one that we added here, a 5 terabyte LUN. Once you've got your LUN, you present it to whichever servers you want to present it to. So I think we've presented every LUN to every server here. And you would then, once you've got your LUN presented, you would create a repository on top of that. So I'll just skip the networking tab just now and I'll move to the repositories tab. So in order to use a LUN, in most circumstances, you'll want to create a repository on top of it. So I'll just expand this. So if I just created a new LUN and I wanted to create a repository on top of that, I would click on this button here. I would give it a name, and because it's a LUN rather than an NFS share, I would select physical disk, and I would click here, and it would show me any physical disks or LUNs that hadn't already got a repository on them. Now, because we've already created repositories on all our LUNs, nothing's showing up here, but if you had just created a new LUN, it would show up here, and you would select it and do OK, and the repository would be created. Again, to save you time, when you first set up the rack, they create a default repository for you, which is this one here. So this is created on that 3 terabyte LUN that was created by default, as we can see here. So that's the 3 terabytes there. And this is our default repository. And again, similarly to the default server pool, you don't want to remove this repository or rename it, because that can cause issues with the management software. But again, you don't have to use it. You can use your own repositories as long as you leave this one in place. So if we expand the repositories, let's use the one that we have created ourselves. So this is one I created on a 5 terabyte LUN, as you can see here. It's presented to all the servers in tenant group 1. So I'll just, if we look at the servers and VMs, we can see, sorry, I should have said server pool 1, although, as I said, the two terms are interchangeable. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are the compute nodes in Rack 1 server pool, and those are the compute nodes that we've presented this repository to. So each repository is made up of these 5 folders, 5 categories, if you like. I'll just run through these. ISOs, it's pretty obvious what an ISO is. It's an image that can be used to install an operating system on a blank virtual machine. If I expand this one, we should have an ISO in this one. So we've got an Oracle Linux ISO and a second one, different version. So just the standard ISOs that you would use to install an operating system. Then you have VM files. So each virtual machine is made up of a configuration file and one or more virtual disks. So these are the configuration files. So as you can see, we've got 6 or 7 VMs in this repository, and these are their configuration files. So each of these VM files will have the details of the virtual machine, and it will refer to which virtual disks are used. And these are the virtual disks. So again, we've got slightly more virtual disks because obviously some of our VMs have more than one virtual disks. So as you can see here, looking at these columns, we have a used and a maximum size for virtual disks. So this is because when you create a VM, you can specify whether to use thin provisioning or not. So thin provisioning basically means that the size of the virtual disk will grow as the disk is written to, as the file is written to. Whereas if it's not thin provisioning, then the virtual disk is created straight away with its maximum size. and it will always be that size. So you can see most of these are not thin, but there's a couple, should be a couple. Yeah, so there's one there that's obviously been created with thin provisioning. So it's currently 26 gig, and it can grow up to a maximum size of 98 gig. There's a slight I/O trade-off here. So thin provisioning does mean that because you're growing the disk as you're writing to it, the I/O is slightly slower, but it's really not that much of a difference. So if you're looking for pure performance, you don't want to use thin provisioning when you create your virtual disks. So just getting back to VM files, each VM has a configuration file and one or more virtual disks. Then you have these templates and appliances. So templates and appliances are what you use to create virtual machines from pre-configured images. So there's various ways you can create templates and appliances or access templates and appliances. One of them is Oracle provides a large number of pre-configured, pre-installed templates and appliances from various websites, various web pages. So I've got a couple here I've logged into earlier. So this is one here through oracle.com, and if I scroll down, you can see these are all templates and appliances that can be downloaded from Oracle's website. So for instance, they've got database templates, they've got some middleware templates, they've got all the Oracle Linux versions are available as templates, pre-configured, pre-installed. So it just basically means that it saves you a lot of work installing a brand new OS, a brand new VM from ISO, configuring it all. It's all basically available for you, pre-configured, pre-installed as a single image. They also have Solaris, and they've even got stuff like Enterprise Manager. So by far the quickest way to set up an Enterprise Manager server is to download a pre-configured, pre-installed template like this one and import it to your PC, and you just start up the VM and you have a Enterprise Manager server ready to go. Much quicker than installing all the software yourself. And also this is a database page. So we have all the different versions of Oracle database available, 18, 19, 12. I'm sure you can even find 11 if you look harder. Again, these are all VMs with the database software pre-installed, pre-configured, ready to run. All you need to do is click on the link. It'll take you to the Oracle support website. Assuming you have a login there, you can download the template to your local machine. And once you have it there, you can then go into your repository, click on the download or import rather link, specify the location. So I'll just quickly do this while we're here. So I've got a few templates sitting on this HTTP server here. So here's there's a small Oracle Linux template here. So if I just copy this URL. So this is a machine on my data center network. Give it that URL, and then we'll just, as a quick test, we'll just use this small. Obviously, the bigger the template, the longer it takes to import. So this is quite a small one, Oracle Linux 7 one, and just paste that in here. Oops, sorry. Nope. Okay, that's better. Click OK, and that will import that template into this repository. And once it's there, once it's in that repository, it'll be available for use to create new VMs from. The other ways that you can get templates in here are you can create your own templates. So once you have a VM running, you might have installed some software onto it, some users, and configured it up. You can then click on it, right-click on it, and do Save as Template. And we'll look at that in the next session when we do more detailed. When we look in more detail about managing virtual machines. But yeah, you can create your own templates, and you can also import templates from other PCAs if you've worked on them there. You can once you've saved that template, you can copy it out as a what they call it's a TGZ file, basically a zipped tar file. And once you have it on your data center network, you can import it like we're doing here. So you can see the template's being copied, and it's now unpacking it. So it shouldn't take too long. It's not a big template. And once it's unpacked, it's ready for use. Just to quickly touch on the difference between templates and appliances. They really are, and you can see that's successfully copied in already. So there it is. They are available for use. Didn't take very long. The difference between appliances and templates is basically just in the way that the file is packaged. So they're essentially the same thing. A template is a TGZ file, like I just said. It's a zipped tar file containing the VM configuration file and the VM virtual disks. And the OVA is just, the appliance is just an OVA file. So if you've used VirtualBox or even VMware, you'll probably be familiar with OVAs. It's just another way of packaging a virtual machine. Again, it's a configuration file and some virtual disks, one or more virtual disks. So you can, with OVAs, you can import these directly in from VirtualBox. So if you have a VM running in VirtualBox, you can export that VM to an OVA, copy it across, and import it into your PCA, and it should run without any kind of management changes. Depending on, it's possible that you might have to do a little bit of tweaking, but normally we can just import the VirtualBox VM straight into the PCA and run them without any kind of tweaking, without any too much tweaking. So that's the repository. And once your template's in that repository, you can then create a virtual machine from it. Before we do that, in fact, we won't be doing that in this session. That'll be in the next session. Let's go on to the networking tab. So we haven't looked at this yet. This is where you can define networks. So again, out of the box, there's a couple of default networks there for you, so that you don't have to do any management before you can get cracking with your virtual machines. A couple of management networks here, the .32 and .40. These are, 32 I think is used for live migration of VMs, and 40 is the internal storage network. This is what all the components use to communicate with the storage controllers. And then you have these two default networks for VMs. So as the two names suggest, the default external network, you would assign this to a VM if you wanted to access that VM from outside the PCA, i.e. from your data center network. So most VMs that you create will have at least one NIC which has the default external network on it. You can also, there's also a single default internal network provided. And as the name suggests, again, this could be used for VNICs where you only need the communication to happen inside the PCA, so i.e. between different VMs on the PCA. So if you had for instance, a database cluster, you would have to have some internal communication between the parts of the cluster, and you could use the default internal network for that, because the traffic doesn't need to leave the PCA rack. You can also create your own custom networks in addition. So you would click on this, create a new network, specify all the different parameters that you need to give it. And as you can see here, we've created a few custom networks of our own. So a couple of external ones and a couple of internal ones for various projects. Again, pretty easy to do, but in general, we just, for most of the VMs I create, I would just use the default external network for the VNICs. So again, so that I can communicate with them from outside the rack, from outside the PCA. So that's the networking tab. We've looked at the repositories tab. Health tab is just a very high-end overview of how the rack is performing. As you can see, everything's in a normal state. If one of the servers was down, this would be red, but everything seems to be operating pretty normally. But this servers and VMs tab, this is the one that you use for the vast majority of your PCA OVM management tasks, for creating starting, stopping, migrating, cloning, etc., all your VMs. So I can see the time is almost up, so I'll just quickly show you the virtual machines view here, and this is the view we'll be looking at in the next session. So as you can see, we've got quite a number of VMs running on this server pool. If I just pull this across, you can see all the different names, and you can see, as I mentioned, there's tags. So a number of them have been tagged with usernames. We should really tag them all. It makes management a lot easier. It means you can, at a glance, see what project a virtual machine is part of. But you can see there's a few tags, and each VM, this column here, server, tells you which node the VM is running on. So if I was to click on compute node 7, you can see just the VMs that are running on compute node 7, compute node 8, etc., etc. That's 10 o'clock now, so, or 10 o'clock my time, I should say. So I think I'll just conclude things there, and we'll move in the next session. We'll move on to much more detail about managing virtual machines using OVM Manager.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for the excellent session. To everyone, the session was recorded. Is recorded, and I will place it up on the South African Oracle user group website, and we'll email you the links as well. We thank Ian. Like I said before, this is one of 4 sessions, so we will have the next session maybe in 2 weeks' time. I see most of the questions have been answered by Yaqub. If you do have any more questions, you are welcome to email yaqub.patel@oracle.com. But yeah, that's all from us. Thank you very much. And we had an excellent audience of around 50 people. So looking forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Yaqub.
Thank you for your attention, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye all.
Thanks.